If you're wondering how this is up 2 days before the album is even out, that's because Comaduster was actually nice enough to provide me with an advance copy last week, so thank you very much for that, dude. This did benefit from the extra time to sit with me, so yeah, let's go. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Comaduster, Darker Matter. It's been a minute since I've gotten to talk about Comaduster. I've reviewed 3 previous projects from this guy. His first 2 albums, Hollow Worlds and Solace, and his side project as Underfelt, Darkened Windows. All those videos will be linked in the description. So for those unfamiliar with my previous thoughts on this guy, I've definitely been a big fan for a minute. Hollow Worlds absolutely blew me away when I first heard it. It sounded nothing like anything I'd ever heard before. Just this hyper-dense mix of IDM, dubstep, metal, industrial, ambient, all number of influences, and an experience that lived up to its album cover. Just this giant storm of broken metallic shards. It was the kind of album that had me wondering where he could possibly go from there, and yet somehow he managed to top it with his follow-up in 2017, Solace. While sonically not a change of pace in any way, it was a lot tighter, it was a lot catchier, it was more emotionally involved. It had this sprawling sci-fi concept attached to it with giant black holes, metaphysical beings, the death and rebirth of the entire universe. He had it all planned out to the most minor of details, all explained in a massive PDF that came packaged with it. And yet, you really don't need that PDF to fully enjoy it. That was basically a bonus. He somehow executed in such a way that didn't feel self-important or pretentious. He connected it to his own struggles with mental illnesses and ADD and that kind of thing, and it made it feel grounded and even relatable. It was absolutely incredible, and cemented him as one of my favorite artists to break out in this decade. Now, Darkened Windows, I wasn't nearly as head over heels for that project. It's an entirely instrumental album that just focused on the bassy dubstep sounds, like old school dubstep, with lots of his usual stuttering edits and impressive attention to detail. It was really good, created some cool atmosphere, but it was still just a side project. And not one that I felt broke off enough from the usual sounds he explored in his work as Comaduster or had enough sonic variety to interest me on a deeper level. And this was kind of worrying too, in some ways. Comaduster is a lot of things. He's mega talented, he's got an insane attention to detail, and has a knack for fitting so much in his mixes yet still balancing everything perfectly. He's an excellent producer, but he hasn't yet really proven himself to be the most versatile of producers. A lot of his work sounds pretty similar and relies on a lot of the same blends and styles. I mean, he isn't not versatile. His albums have all had enough variety to keep me interested the whole time. But he was maybe starting to get a little predictable. And it was also worrying because back in 2016 and 2017, Comaduster didn't really have any competition that I knew of. He was completely unlike anything I'd ever heard, and now more artists have come along that have pulled off similar styles to his, but did their own creative things with it. See Frequent, or Elon Moore, or Hudson Lee. Also discovered Cell Dweller late, and End of an Empire isn't that far off from what he does. Artists like those have the same insane attention to detail that Comaduster has, but pulled it in their own different directions. I may still be heavily impressed by Comaduster's work, and those first 2 albums still absolutely hold up as amazing, even after finding out about those artists. But the initial novelty of his sound being as impressive as it is kinda worn off. I know what to expect from him now. And another album that just does the same kind of stuff as those first 2 albums wouldn't interest me as much without adding something substantial to set itself apart. I mean, I wouldn't mind it. His formula and style is still really enjoyable in the same way, but he's definitely not gonna get another 9 out of 10 that way. So may as well get into the lead up to Darker Matter itself, and there's a lot to cover here. See, Comaduster released more than half of this album as singles beforehand, somewhat inspired by the chapters that Cell Dweller made to promote End of an Empire, fitting how he's now signed to Cell Dweller's label Fixed to Music. So the singles, there's been a lot of them dropped slowly throughout the course of 2019, and they were a bit of a mixed bag for me. Like, first there was Fever Rift, a track that just kind of sounded like the usual from him, didn't stick out that much to me. Although it was also packaged with an ambient interlude, a Somnolent Descent, that was nice. Then there was Monolith, which sounded pretty promising given how it was his first time including a female guest vocalist, although I didn't really care for this one when it first dropped. It was a bit of a slog to get through. The constant buzzing noises going throughout the mix were kind of headache-inducing, and the singer, Mary Kitman, really did not sound like she was enjoying herself. The whole track felt like it was physically weighing down on me. I mean, that could all be the point. This album is also called Darker Matter. It does not seem to be aiming to be a pleasant or easy listen to get through, but Though I did quite like this track's B-side, Pyramids. It had some nice guitars there, a more open and melodic feel to it. And the next single, Riverbound, that was a lot more promising because it didn't sound anything like any track I'd heard from Comaduster so far. It was this kind of acoustic guitar-driven folk song that still had quite a nice atmosphere to it and was downbeat in a more enjoyable way. Had Mari Kitman as backing vocals too, and while she is barely noticeable, she is still definitely a positive addition to the mix. Also, another ambient interlude came with that one called What Can Never Be Taken From You. That was neat. So that's 6 tracks out of 16 just on the singles, and he released 3 more further singles. First there was Failure 2 and Decimate the Burden, which also just kind of felt like the usual from him, didn't stick out much to me by themselves. And also Following the Night, that was a good one though, with a stronger hook and more conventional, like, pendulum-style beat behind it. Though I initially skipped over that one when it dropped, I didn't actually hear it until getting to the album proper. Needless to say, that's a lot of freaking singles. And as out-of-context tracks, they were a little all over the place, to say the least. I went into this album really hoping to love it, but I kinda had a feeling it wasn't going to be on par with his first 2 for me. Was honestly kind of expecting this to be a bit of a letdown. Though, I did also remember thinking a lot of these same things going into Solace for the first time. I mean, I initially didn't care for Emergent 1 when I heard that by itself out of context. Didn't think it was anything special or felt like he was pushing himself then either, but obviously it played better on the album itself. And the album had a lot of better material hidden within. And while I'm at it, Solace as a whole wasn't a 9 on first listen either. It only got there with repeat visits. Darker Matter had the potential to surprise me in the same way. And even if it's not on par with those first 2, that's still not saying much. He did set the bar ridiculously high. And this album could still be great while not topping either of his earlier albums. And after hearing it and letting it sit with me a while, that's basically about where I fall. Darker Matter didn't wow me like the first 2 did, but it's still a lot of fun to listen to all the way through. Very solid project, and despite its length, had enough variety to justify it. Yeah, that's another thing. This project is 80 minutes long and 16 tracks. I was worried this was going to feel like way too much. One of the things that made Solace work so well was the fact that it only had 8 tracks. It didn't have any filler or waste a second of your time. But he did dodge the bullet of feeling overstuffed with this album. Again, it doesn't really feel like he's pushing himself that far out of his comfort zone, but he does continue to do what he does best, and he can still do it really freaking well, while still keeping things varied enough to justify the length, maybe even more varied than the first 2 albums. It's definitely not a straight rehash, so that worry was quelled. I've seen talk somewhere of this being his darkest album yet, which, given we're coming out of a sophomore album that had the end of the universe in it, more than once, I believe, that's quite a bar to top. Darker Matter is, unsurprisingly, quite dark, certainly has the darkest album cover of the 3, though sonically it's like barely darker than Solace, if that. It's kind of a hard comparison to make because everything Comaduster's ever done is pretty dark. This one is more notable for not having such a universe-destroying scale as Solace, trying to ground itself a lot more, be more personal. Well, the lyrics are all still pretty obtuse and abstract, but there are a lot of negative emotions poured into every single track. You hear lines like, "Your origami door won't weather this elemental firestorm. Battle in my mind and it's hard to stay alive. What will we do with the bodies? Am I failure?" To name a few. There's one track on here, Time We Have Left, sung for Jonas, which is almost certainly a tribute to someone in his life who's gone, probably passed away. That was the most openly personal moment on the album, and it didn't wrap itself in weird imagery inspired by science fiction and horror fantasy and paradoxical physics, as the Bandcamp description says. I didn't really feel like doing a deeper dive into the lyrics than that. I mean, I'm not the guy you usually go to if you want lyrical analysis. But the point is, the lyrics are all fitting for the agonizingly chaotic instrumentals he puts his voice over, and all have a strong emotional core. But more important to me is how it all sounds. Obviously, the production is basically pitch perfect across the board, as you would hope for. As usual, he's able to fit a lot of noisy and chaotic sounds and still make each sound feel like it's given the proper space. And even when it's not quite as spacious, it's intentionally heavy and claustrophobic. See Monolith again. Comaduster delivering on the kind of production and complicating mastering jobs that I would hope for out of him. And despite how heavy this album gets, like I said, it doesn't feel like it overstayed its welcome or felt too overbearing. And there is definitely more sonic variety here than his last two albums as well, though not to the point of feeling incohesive or throwing off the flow from track to track. Which is also really well done. May as well discuss individual tracks. I kinda already did discuss most of them when talking about the pre-album singles, but I'll go into those again since pretty much all of them got better when I heard them in context to the album. Easily the track that improved the most after hearing it in context was Failure 2. It merges so seamlessly into the opener, Cast Your Shadow, is basically a part 2 to that track. Once I heard that, it instantly made this track feel more special and turned it into a highlight. I did eventually soften on Monolith as well. While it's still not one of my biggest favorites, the constant buzzing throughout, as I mentioned, made it all claustrophobic and ridiculously heavy, super dense without having a lot of sounds going into the mix. It's a hard one to get through, but with each passing listen, it's become more and more clear the choices were fully intentional. It feels more like a key moment from the album. And Mari Kitman's voice, miserable as she may sound, has grown on me too. I feel like I've gotten spoiled by the Kirsty Hawkshaws of the world, and that is very obviously not what they were going for here. All the singles that I liked before still hold up as highlights now. I still really like the spacious, echoing melodic flares of Pyramids. I still love the propulsive pendulum-esque grooves of Following the Night. That one kicks ass and is probably the catchiest track on the album. Riverbound may stick out like a sore thumb with its much more stripped-back, folk-tinged instrumental, but it is still an absolutely welcome change of pace. Makes for a great breather moment, and one of the more emotionally resonant moments as well. It still has an expansive and cinematic feel to it. Great track. All the more low-key ambient-centric moments are welcome here, the ambient interludes as well, like A Somnolent Descent and What Can Never Be Taken From You, do help the pacing quite a bit. The two singles that took me the longest to warm up to were Fever Rift and Decimate the Burden. Still not particular favorites on here, and both kind of feel like what you would expect from Comaduster at this point. Although they do have pretty solid tunes behind them that grew on me. Fever Rift's growling vocoders going, "Set on fire," do make for a solid hook that I quite enjoy. It's kind of become this album's emergent one, where I was initially but it did have a catchy hook that pulled me in with return visits. And Decimate the Burden, well, it's also topped elsewhere on the album, but I never feel like skipping it either. There's some good melodic moments on there, even if they don't as easily stick in my head. But now we gotta talk about the stuff that wasn't released as singles. I did touch on Cast Your Shadow a little bit earlier, but that was definitely an opener that pulled me in right from the outset, starting you out with loud, jerky, screeching glitch noises. And opening up into this awesome, driving, melodic burst. Right from when I first heard this, I was like, why was I doubting this guy? Then there's the title track, which aims to sink to the lowest depths of depravity that this album can hit, with metal screaming added on later for the extra emotional angst and feeling like one of the biggest, most important, and climactic moments on here. That one's pretty awesome. Nebulous Amorphous also has the metal screaming in it, and brings it in a lot earlier than the title track did. Doesn't feel like quite as special or impactful a moment to me. But still cool, I guess, and it does have quite the raw and aggressive feel to it. Though the last four tracks on here are all big highlights for me. Bad Blood is one of the catchier tracks on here, is this massive, slow burn track with his dramatic, agonized vocal performance. Still has a melodic core to it that made it stick with me. Time We Have Left, song for Jonas, I did touch on that one earlier, but it sonically helps serve to make Riverbound feel less out of place. It's another ambient-centric track centered around a stripped-back guitar performance. Another breather that also shows one of his most vulnerable moments. That was a consistent highlight. And there's Escape Velocity, which, when I saw the title of that one, I was like, if you do not have a big, fast-paced drum and bass climax on this one, I'm going to be really disappointed. And it took a bit. It had some abstract build-ups. Oh yeah, I feel it coming, and yeah, there it is. Pendulum beat with propulsive metal guitars provided by Elijah Hennig. He does metal guitars on a couple of tracks here, so shout out to him. And yeah, Escape Velocity isn't as catchy as Following the Night, but it does get a similar rush out of me and applies that same fast pace to a more abstract and complex piece that has more change-ups and side tracks. So yeah, that was pretty awesome too. And finally, the album ends with the 8-minute Triquetra Induo Hidden to Yourself. I wasn't sure what this was going to be like, but as it turns out, we got a completely beatless number here. A final drawn-out breather to close us out with his whispering random numbers in the background in many spots here. Not exactly closing with a literal bang that Solace does, but I am all for a nice ambient closer like this, and it still carries the same sense of menace and heaviness that most of the album has. Another track that is very much welcome here, and I think takes us out on a high note, if a very abstract and mysterious one. So, that's Darker Matter, and yeah, even if I don't love every track on here as much as the next, it's still pretty damn solid and well-paced in such a way that no track feels like it had its impact muted. He changed things up enough in the track listing to keep things interesting the whole time, I think more so than his last two albums. And as for overall feelings, I will admit that what kept this album from rising to the heights of his first two albums for me was that lack of an initial wow factor. I mean, I was not at all prepared for the journey that either Hollow Worlds or Solace would take me on when they came out, Hollow Worlds especially. Here, I kinda knew what to expect, and for the most part, I kinda got what I thought I was going to get, but it isn't a carbon copy of his last two albums by any stretch. Darker Matter is basically his least immediate listen to date. It may not have initially wowed me, but there is just so much substance packed into this album, and plenty of different flavors. As it turns out, this album is very much the kind of listen that benefited from my sitting with for a while. Eventually started to feel like a puzzle where I was unlocking new insights and interesting details with every listen. Took on the Black Dog Spanners effect. It is the kind of album that I have to be in the right mood for. Some of my earlier listens did in fact make it feel like a bit of an overstuffed slog, but that's kind of worn off by now. Obviously, this album isn't out yet for another 2 days, but I can definitely give it my recommendation just like his other albums. He's already released most of my least favorite moments here. There's even more interesting things coming for you when it finally drops in its entirety, so if you already liked all the singles he's dropped, then you're probably gonna love this album even more than I did. They do all play better in the full context of the album. I'm not 100% sure whether it'll end up on my year-end list proper, definitely an honorable mention at the very worst, but yeah, Darker Matter is yet another great Comaduster project, definitely worth spending some time with and really immersing yourself in once it drops. I'm overall feeling an 8.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, a link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.